Yeah.
Let's move on and talk about Dave Chappelle, the stand-up comedian who was tackled on stage by a man with a replica handgun and a knife during a recording of a Netflix show in LA. The comedian has been criticised by some for his jokes about the trans community, and there was some backlash last year against his Netflix special. In that show, he stated that gender is a fact and accused the trans community of being too sensitive. Geoff, going to come to you first on this, obviously, being a comedian. What's your feeling about, well, where do you kind of place Dave Chappelle?
Well, first up, my gigs this week are Saffron Walden and Swindon. So
Okay,
I think
we got that out of the way.
I think they're going to be all right. Ipswich could go either way, let's be honest. But Dave Chappelle is, I mean, obviously, you know, a lot of stand-ups have a hell of a lot of respect for him. He does what I think stand-up it does best, is he speaks with honesty and humour about the experience of being alive and what people really, really think, you know, which is something I'm interested in. I mean, there's a lot of talk about censorship. It is very different for somebody at Dave Chappelle's level, you know, him and people like, you know, the gods of comedy, Ricky Gervais, Bill Burr, people like that, is that, you know, they can't really be cancelled because of the way that comedy operates now. They've got global fan bases. So there isn't censorship as such. But what there are what people who advocate cancel culture would normally say, which are consequences. They keep saying the word consequences, which is fine. But you have to ask, are the consequences commensurate? There's a word I haven't said since A-levels, but commensurate with a joke. That's the point, is you can't say something's not a joke just because it gets a bad reaction. If the context is that a comedian was at a comedy gig and says a thing to an audience of people who laugh, you can say you didn't like the joke, and you could say that the joke upset you. But what you can't do, which is what a lot of sort of activist types now, is they try and pull it out of the context of a joke because they know that that's a safer ground for them to argue on. And I just think that there are a lot of humorless people, and no one likes the feeling of not being in on a joke, and it can cause anger. And of course, we don't know the reasons this guy's done this with Chappelle, but there are a lot of people like him who are increasingly feeling a lot of antipathy towards comedians. It is tricky, but then if you say every joke essentially has a victim, the way you pitch that is obviously the thing that can have nuance. But in the case of people like Chappelle, obviously this is a show where people know that he would be on. It's particularly now that comedy is going on streaming services, as we saw with the reaction to the Jimmy Carr joke, the amount of selection that the audience is making in advance of that. The audience, it's not like, you know, when there was only 4 channels and if someone went on the Raw Variety show and said something awful, people were sort of subjected to that. But I think comedy is different now.
Of course, yes.
There's a lot more choice involved, and I think that what we find is, you know, this sort of offence archaeology where arguably people go looking for it.
Before you go, we talk about TV that changed our lives. Lots of people have suggested TV shows that they watched that put them on a particular career path or changed their view of the world. Geoff and Afia, Geoff, start with you. Any TV show that affected you can look back on?
I think Dave Allen. My mum used to watch Dave Allen. I think he's one of the most underrated comedians, sort of globally, certainly in terms of this country. And he could do it all. He was dressed really smart. He had a twinkle in his eye, but he spoke about everything: observational humour, religion. I think he's one of the best.
He did inspire you to dress well, though, I noticed.
Look, a lot of people
is
say,
that coming from you? Hang on a sec.
A lot of people have said I look like a right-wing electrician. You know, the kind of tradesman that you just don't discuss politics with. You go, okay, mate, I'll leave you to it. Let me know if you want tea.